The plane hummed steadily as it sliced through the sky on its way to Dallas. But for one passenger, the calm atmosphere was quickly shifting. James sat quietly in seat 12B, his paperback novel resting on his lap. He had boarded the flight with a polite smile, said a few words to the flight attendant, Sophie, and asked for a glass of water. That was all. But Sophie's behavior was odd from the start. When she came down the aisle handing out drinks, she skipped right over him. James raised his hand and called out, "Excuse me, could I get a cup of water?" Sophie stopped, her gaze flicking toward him, then quickly away. "I'll get to you," she said curtly, her tone a bit too sharp. James blinked but said nothing. He didn't want to make a scene. He was just thirsty. 10 minutes passed, and Sophie came back down the aisle, serving the passengers behind him, laughing and chatting with them. When she returned, she handed him a water cup. No smile, no acknowledgement, just the water. James took it without a word, trying to brush off the awkwardness, but then Sophie came back again. This time, her face was a little harder, her voice more forceful. "Sir, you need to keep your bag under the seat in front of you." James glanced down at his bag. "It is under the seat," he said calmly. "I saw you move it," she snapped. "It needs to stay put." James shook his head, still composed. "No, ma'am, it hasn't moved." Sophie pursed her lips and turned on her heel. 2 rows behind James, a voice murmured, "Why is she targeting him?" Sophie disappeared into the galley, but it was clear the tension had thickened in the cabin. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances, some looking at each other, others at James. Then, moments later, Sophie came back with a supervisor, a younger, uncomfortable-looking attendant, who seemed to be trying to figure out what was going on. Sophie spoke first, her voice loud and authoritative. "This passenger is being uncooperative. He's questioning my instructions and making me feel unsafe," Sophie said, casting a pointed glance at James. James met the supervisor's eyes. His voice was calm, unshaken. "I've followed every rule. I asked for water. That's it." The supervisor hesitated, clearly unsure of what to do. "Sir, we just want to make sure everything's okay." "I'm fine," James replied coolly, "unless asking for water has become a criminal offense." Passengers were starting to notice. The young man across the aisle had his phone out, quietly recording the scene. James' steady gaze met the camera's lens, but he didn't look away. Sophie's frustration was mounting, her fingers twitching, but she held it in for now. It was then that a woman in first class leaned into the aisle, her voice carrying across the cabin. "I've been watching," she said, "and he hasn't done anything wrong." Sophie's face reddened, her eyes narrowing as she shot the woman a sharp look. "Ma'am, please don't involve yourself," Sophie said, her tone dripping with condescension. But the young man with the phone wasn't backing down either. "She's right," he added. "I've seen it too." A ripple of whispers began spreading through the cabin. A few more passengers started speaking up, some nodding in agreement, others quietly voicing their own discontent. James stood up slowly, the weight of the moment settling around him. "Are you trying to humiliate me in front of everyone?" he asked Sophie, his voice unwavering. The silence that followed was thick and oppressive. "I've served this country," he continued, his eyes scanning the room. "I've been a teacher, a coach, a father. I've been followed in stores, called names, harassed, and now I can't even ask for water on this flight without suspicion." A flight marshal stood at the back, watching silently. His presence was a quiet but firm reminder that things were escalating. James took a deep breath. "I've stayed quiet my whole life to keep the peace. But silence doesn't solve anything. It just hides the truth. So today I'm speaking." The young man clapped, a single, loud sound that caught everyone's attention. Others followed suit, clapping softly at first, then with more conviction. The murmur grew into voices of support. A woman in a business suit nodded her head, her voice soft but firm. "We see you, and we're with you." Sophie's face turned crimson, and without another word, she hurried toward the back of the plane. The supervisor remained by James, awkwardly shifting from foot to foot. "Sir, I apologize," he stammered. James looked at him, his expression unreadable. "That's a start." The plane was approaching its destination, but the tension in the cabin lingered. Passengers were no longer hurrying to exit. Instead, they waited for James. No one rushed to the front. At the gate, the teenager with the phone walked up to him. "What's your name, sir?" he asked. James smiled gently, his voice a touch lighter. "James." The teenager grinned. "Well, James," he said, extending his hand, "you made this flight unforgettable." They shook hands, the weight of the moment hanging in the air. And as the passengers filed out of the plane, one thing was certain: things weren't over yet. James stepped off the plane, his heart still racing from the encounter. The applause, though brief, had been powerful. It wasn't just the acknowledgement. It was the quiet rebellion against the injustice that he had experienced. People walked past him now with quiet glances, some nodding in recognition to the terminal. He was met by the flight marshal who had stood quietly during the confrontation. The marshal, a tall figure in a neat uniform, approached James with a soft expression. "Sir," the marshal said, his voice low, "I just wanted to say thank you for speaking up." James blinked in surprise. "Thank you? For what?" The marshal hesitated. "For standing your ground. It's rare, you know. People often stay silent, even when they know something's wrong." James nodded, his lips tight. "I didn't want to make a scene, but sometimes staying quiet doesn't help anyone." Before James could respond further, the young man from earlier, Kyle, caught up with him. The teenager was out of breath, yet beaming with excitement. "You were incredible," Kyle said. "I've never seen anyone handle a situation like that." James gave a small smile, though he still felt the weight of the moment. "Thanks," he said quietly. "You're James, right?" Kyle asked, offering his hand. "I'm Kyle." James shook it, firm and genuine. "Nice to meet you, Kyle." Kyle's voice lowered. "I've got to tell you something. People need to know about what happened. You're not the first person this has happened to. It happens all the time. But you stood up." James exhaled, his heart heavy. "It's not about me. It's about all of us. It's about seeing injustice and doing something, even if it's just speaking up." Kyle's eyes widened. "That's exactly what I want to say. I've already posted the video online. It's going viral." James felt his stomach tighten. "I didn't do it for that. I did it because it was the right thing to do." Kyle was already pulling up his phone, showing James the growing number of shares and comments. "People need to see this. They're calling you a hero." James stared at the screen for a moment. The video was everywhere. Comments were flooding in, most of them supportive, echoing his message of standing up against injustice. It was a strange feeling. He had never wanted to be anyone's hero. He just wanted respect. "I didn't mean for this to happen," James muttered, looking away. Kyle laughed lightly. "I know, but it's exactly what people need. We need to know that we're not alone." Just then, the supervisor from the plane appeared in front of them. His face was flushed with embarrassment. "James?" the supervisor asked, his voice hesitant. James turned toward him. "Yes." The supervisor shifted nervously. I just wanted to apologize for what happened on the plane. I didn't handle it well. Sophie, she shouldn't have treated you that way." James raised an eyebrow. "I'm not asking for apologies. I want actions. I want things to change." The supervisor looked down, clearly uncomfortable. "I know, and I'm going to make sure this gets addressed. I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." James didn't respond immediately, but his eyes softened. "That's a good start." The supervisor nodded and walked away, leaving James standing there with Kyle. James's mind was heavy with the weight of what had just happened. This wasn't just about him. It was about all the people who had been wronged, who had stayed silent, who had been treated unfairly without anyone to speak for them. Suddenly, James's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, expecting another message from Kyle, but it was an email. He glanced at it, his stomach dropping. It was from his attorney, "Rachel, that we need to talk. This is bigger than you think." His hand trembled slightly as he pressed the screen. "Something's not right," James murmured. Kyle looked over. "What's going on?" James hesitated before showing him the email. Kyle's eyes widened. "What do you think this means?" James was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know, but I have a feeling this won't end with an apology." The tension in the air was palpable as they walked toward the exit, but Kyle's voice broke the silence. "Are you worried about Sophie coming after you?" he asked. James sighed deeply. "It's not just her. I know how these things work. People like her, they don't just let go of power. They come back." Kyle frowned, concern creeping into his expression. So, what are you going to do? James's eyes hardened with determination. Fight, but I won't do it alone. I've got people on my side. It's time for the world to hear the truth. As they reached the gate, James felt the collective weight of the situation. It wasn't just about the apology. It wasn't just about the video. It was about something bigger, something that had been ignored for far too long. I'm not backing down, James muttered, more to himself than to Kyle. Kyle clapped him on the back, his voice full of admiration. I know. You got this. As they shook hands, James couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The battle wasn't over. But for now, his voice had been heard, and nothing could take that away from him.